For most of human history, strength was never meant to last. The human body was shaped for urgency, for reproduction, for survival in landscapes that did not forgive weakness. It was not shaped for decades of stability, comfort, or prolonged physical power. What we call decline may not be a failure at all, but a quiet consequence of how evolution measures success. If our ancestors were never selected to remain strong for long, then what exactly did natural selection choose instead? For most of human history, strength did not exist as an abstract ideal. It was not pursued for appearance, nor for personal records, nor for the quiet satisfaction of feeling powerful. It emerged within landscapes that demanded movement, endurance, and immediate response. When early humans walked across open savannas or through shifting woodlands, strength meant the ability to carry food, to climb uneven ground, to endure long hunts, and to survive sudden threats. It was functional, urgent, and closely tied to the rhythms of a world that did not provide steady comfort. In such environments, the human body developed muscle and bone not to remain permanently strong, but to respond to repeated physical demands that fluctuated with season, climate, and availability of resources. Archaeological evidence from skeletal remains shows robust limb bones in many early populations, yet it also reveals signs of wear, joint degeneration, healed fractures, and asymmetries shaped by repetitive labor. These traces suggest that strength was constantly used, but also constantly eroded by the very tasks it made possible. The environment shaped bodies that could withstand strain, yet it did not eliminate strain itself. From the beginning, strength and damage coexisted. In small hunter-gatherer groups, survival required cooperation. But cooperation did not remove the need for individual physical capability. Carrying water over uneven terrain, transporting hunted animals back to camp, and constructing temporary shelters placed continuous mechanical load on the body. Muscles adapted to these loads through hypertrophy, and bones thickened in response to stress, a process known today as Wolff's Law. Yet these adaptations required energy, and energy was never abundant. Calories had to be obtained through effort, and effort depended on strength. This created a cycle in which strength supported survival, but survival also limited how much strength could be maintained. Maintaining large amounts of muscle tissue is metabolically expensive. In environments where food availability fluctuated, the body favored efficiency over permanent peak performance. Strength increased when necessary and decreased when resources became scarce. The human body learned flexibility more than permanence. Looking further back to our evolutionary origins, the shift toward upright walking freed the hands but altered mechanical stresses on the spine and lower limbs. Bipedalism allowed tool use and long-distance travel, yet it also introduced new vulnerabilities in the hips, knees, and lower back. Fossil evidence from early Homo species shows adaptations for endurance, walking, and running rather than explosive power alone. This suggests that the kind of strength selected by natural pressures was practical and sustainable over moderate spans of adult life, particularly during reproductive years. It was not designed for indefinite preservation. Selection favored individuals who could reach maturity, reproduce, and assist in raising offspring. Beyond those years, the intensity of selective pressure diminished. The environment did not require that everybody remain at peak strength into advanced age. It required that enough individuals survive long enough to ensure continuity of the group. Seasonal scarcity further shaped this balance. During dry seasons or periods of migration, caloric intake could drop significantly. Under such conditions, preserving life often required reducing metabolic expenditure. Muscle tissue, while useful, became an energy reserve. The body could catabolize muscle to maintain essential functions when food was limited. This biological strategy underscores a quiet principle. Strength was never meant to be untouchable. It was both asset and reserve, built when resources allowed, surrendered when survival demanded. The archaeological record does not reveal societies organized around preserving strength into old age. Instead, it reveals communities adapting to ecological pressures with flexibility. When we imagine our ancestors at their physical peak, it is tempting to see them as enduring symbols of lasting vigor. Yet their bodies existed within tight energetic budgets and unpredictable climates. Strength rose and fell within those constraints. From the very beginning of human history, the body was shaped to answer immediate environmental demands, not to remain permanently powerful across decades of stability. The landscape selected for adaptability, not immortality of strength. In early human groups, strength was not evenly distributed, nor was it expected to remain constant throughout life. The structure of small bands meant that individuals of different ages contributed in different ways. Young adults often carried the heaviest physical burdens, moving long distances, hunting large animals, or constructing shelters. Children observed and learned. Older individuals, when present, offered memory, knowledge of landscapes, and social cohesion. This distribution of roles reveals something subtle about the evolutionary design of the body. Peak physical strength was concentrated within a limited window, closely aligned with reproductive years. Beyond that window, other forms of contribution became more valuable to the group's continuity. In such a structure, the maintenance of maximum strength into advanced age was not essential for survival of the population. Anthropological studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer societies, often used cautiously as partial analogues for the past, show similar patterns. Physical performance tends to rise in adolescence, stabilize in early adulthood, and gradually decline thereafter. Yet social value does not disappear with physical decline. Knowledge of seasonal migration routes, medicinal plants, animal behavior, and group history becomes increasingly important. This suggests that human survival has always depended on more than raw strength alone. From an evolutionary perspective, once an individual had contributed genetically and socially to the next generation, the selective pressure to preserve peak muscle mass weakened. The body continued to function, often for many years, but the biological urgency that once fueled maximal strength faded. This pattern can also be traced in skeletal remains. Many archaeological sites reveal individuals who lived well beyond the age of peak physical capability. Their bones often show signs of degeneration, arthritic joints, compressed vertebrae, healed fractures that altered posture. These markers indicate that the body endured strain over decades. They also show that communities supported individuals whose physical strength had diminished. Care for injured or elderly members is evident in fossils where severe injuries healed sufficiently to allow survival for years afterward. Such findings imply social cooperation that extended beyond pure physical advantage. Strength mattered, but it was not the sole determinant of human continuity. Within this framework, the inability of the body to remain strong forever becomes less mysterious. The energy required to sustain dense muscle tissue and rapid repair mechanisms competes with other biological demands. Immune defense, reproductive function, and brain metabolism all draw from the same limited energetic pool. The human brain, unusually large relative to body size, consumes a significant portion of resting energy expenditure. Throughout evolutionary history, this energetic investment in cognition may have shifted the balance away from extreme muscular durability. Intelligence, planning, and cooperation reduced reliance on brute strength alone. Over time, the survival advantage of coordinated groups and tool use lessened the evolutionary pressure to maintain extraordinary strength deep into old age. Environmental variability reinforced this balance. Climatic shifts, resource fluctuations, and migration required flexibility rather than permanent physical dominance. A body capable of adapting, building muscle when needed, reducing it when energy was scarce, was more advantageous than one locked into constant maximal strength. Muscle tissue responds dynamically to load and nutrition, reflecting a system designed for responsiveness. When demands decrease or resources tighten, strength declines. This responsiveness reveals an evolutionary priority: efficiency over permanence. In early human landscapes, life expectancy at birth was low due to infant mortality and external hazards. Yet those who survived childhood often reached middle adulthood. The crucial years for reproduction and child-rearing did not require decades of sustained peak performance beyond that point. Natural selection, therefore, concentrated its refining influence on the phases of life most relevant to gene transmission. After those phases, biological maintenance continued, but with diminishing optimization. The body was shaped to be sufficient, not invincible. Seen through this lens, the gradual loss of strength is not an abrupt betrayal, but a continuation of an ancient pattern. The human organism was sculpted within social groups where roles shifted with age, where knowledge complemented muscle, and where cooperation compensated for individual decline. The landscape did not demand eternal strength. It demanded contribution within a moving web of relationships and limited resources. From the beginning, the body carried within it an understanding that strength would rise, serve its purpose, and slowly yield to other priorities embedded in the long arc of human history. Across long stretches of prehistoric time, human bodies existed within cycles that were rarely stable. Climatic fluctuations altered vegetation, animal migration, and water availability. During colder periods or extended droughts, food scarcity placed pressure on every physiological system. In such contexts, the body's capacity to endure mattered more than its ability to remain permanently strong. Endurance allowed movement across distances in search of resources, yet endurance itself did not require maximal muscle mass. It required metabolic efficiency, the careful allocation of limited energy, and the ability to adjust internal priorities when conditions shifted. Strength, therefore, functioned as a tool within a larger strategy of survival, rather than as a fixed state to be preserved at all costs. The archaeological record from Upper Paleolithic sites shows evidence of repeated migrations. Tool technologies changed, hunting patterns adapted, and settlement areas shifted as environments transformed. These movements imply that human groups were often in transition. A body carrying large reserves of muscle might perform well during abundance, yet during prolonged scarcity, that same tissue demanded calories that were no longer available. Muscle is metabolically active. Maintaining it requires ongoing investment. When intake falls below demand, the body responds by reducing non-essential expenditure. Over time, this includes the gradual breakdown of muscle proteins to preserve critical organs and maintain blood glucose levels. This response is not a malfunction. It reflects a deep evolutionary logic shaped by environments where unpredictability was constant. Evidence from skeletal isotope analysis suggests that diets varied widely depending on geography and climate. Some populations relied heavily on large game, others on marine resources, and others on mixed plant and animal diets. Such variability meant that nutritional stability was rarely guaranteed across decades of life. The body that survived these shifts was one capable of flexibility, not rigidity. Muscle mass increased with repeated physical stress and adequate protein intake, yet it declined when those conditions changed. Strength, therefore, was embedded within ecological rhythms rather than insulated from them. As humans began to settle in more permanent agricultural communities, new patterns emerged. Farming reduced some forms of migratory stress but introduced repetitive labor. Archaeological evidence from early agricultural skeletons often reveals spinal compression, joint wear, and reduced overall stature compared to some earlier foraging populations. This suggests that the transition to agriculture altered the balance between workload and nutrition. Even in more stable settlements, strength was continuously expended and rarely fully restored. The environment shifted from unpredictable mobility to repetitive strain, yet the underlying principle remained. The body adapted to immediate demands, not to indefinite preservation of peak condition. The passage of time also accumulates microscopic damage. Each contraction of muscle fibers produces small disruptions in tissue structure. Each step transmits force through cartilage and bone. In youth, repair mechanisms operate efficiently, replacing damaged proteins and reinforcing stress structures. However, repair is never perfectly complete. Over decades, subtle imperfections accumulate. Collagen fibers cross-link, reducing elasticity. Satellite cells responsible for muscle regeneration gradually decrease in number and responsiveness. None of these processes appear abruptly. They unfold slowly, reflecting biological systems calibrated for sufficiency rather than endless renewal. From an evolutionary standpoint, there was limited incentive to perfect these long-term maintenance systems. Once individuals contributed to the survival and reproduction of the group, the selective advantage of maintaining maximal strength declined. Communities compensated through social structure, cooperation, and the transmission of knowledge. The body did not need to resist every mark of time. It needed to function well enough during critical periods of life. When viewed against this broad historical canvas, the inability to stay strong forever appears less like a defect and more like a signature of adaptation. Human physiology evolved within fluctuating climates, shifting diets, and dynamic social roles. Strength rose in response to challenge and receded when energy was required elsewhere. Repair systems maintained function but did not eliminate gradual change. The long arc of human existence reveals a body designed to endure variability, not to maintain a constant summit of power. In landscapes where survival depended on adaptability, permanence was never the priority. Natural selection does not measure life the way modern societies do. It does not calculate value in decades lived, nor does it reward the preservation of strength into distant old age simply for its own sake. Its influence is concentrated around one central threshold: successful reproduction. Traits that increase the likelihood of surviving to reproductive maturity, attracting mates, producing offspring, and ensuring those offspring reach independence are more likely to be passed forward. Beyond that period, the intensity of selective pressure gradually weakens. This quiet principle helps explain why the human body was refined to reach strength efficiently in youth and early adulthood, but not necessarily to sustain that same level indefinitely. In early human populations, survival to adulthood was uncertain. Infant and child mortality rates were high due to infection, malnutrition, injury, and environmental hazards. Those who survived these early vulnerabilities entered a relatively narrow window of peak reproductive potential. During this time, physical strength enhanced hunting success, defense, mobility, and social standing. Muscular endurance and skeletal robustness supported the demanding tasks required to provide for offspring and cooperate within the group. Natural selection, therefore, favored bodies that could develop adequate strength by this stage of life. It did not require that this strength remain unchanged for many decades beyond it. Demographic reconstructions from skeletal remains suggest that while some individuals lived into their 40s, 50s, or beyond, the proportion of very elderly individuals was relatively small in prehistoric populations. Life expectancy at birth was low, largely due to early mortality, yet conditional life expectancy, meaning the expected lifespan after surviving childhood, was longer. Even so, the number of individuals reaching advanced old age remained limited compared to modern societies. This demographic reality shaped evolutionary priorities. If only a minority of individuals lived long past reproductive years, the evolutionary benefit of perfecting systems for prolonged strength would have been modest. The human genome reflects this distribution of selective intensity. Many genes that influence growth, hormone regulation, and muscle development are highly active in adolescence and early adulthood. Growth hormone levels peak during puberty and gradually decline thereafter. Testosterone and estrogen follow similar trajectories, rising during reproductive years and decreasing later in life. These hormonal patterns are not arbitrary. They mirror the phases of life during which reproductive success historically mattered most. Once these phases passed, the biological urgency to maintain peak muscle mass and rapid tissue repair diminished. This pattern aligns with a concept known as the selection shadow. After reproductive age, natural selection becomes less effective at removing genetic variations that negatively affect late-life health or strength. Mutations or biological processes that manifest primarily in older individuals may persist because their impact on reproductive success is limited. Over many generations, this dynamic contributes to gradual physiological decline after the reproductive window closes. The body continues to function, often for many years, but the fine-tuning that characterizes youth becomes less pronounced. Early human social structures may have softened some of these effects. Older individuals contributed through knowledge, childcare, and conflict mediation. The grandmother hypothesis proposes that post-reproductive individuals, particularly women, enhance the survival of grandchildren, thereby indirectly supporting gene transmission. Even within this framework, however, the requirement was not for maximal physical strength, but for sustained social and cognitive capacity. The evolutionary advantage lay in cooperation and experience rather than in preserving the muscular peak of early adulthood. When considered in the context of our origins, the gradual decline of strength appears as an extension of how selection operates across the lifespan. The body was shaped to perform intensely during critical reproductive years, to adapt to environmental demands, and to contribute to the group in varied ways over time. It was not shaped under conditions where every individual routinely lived 8 or 9 decades. The architecture of our physiology still reflects those ancient demographic patterns. Strength rises in accordance with reproductive urgency and slowly recedes as selective pressure shifts its focus elsewhere. If natural selection concentrates its influence around the years of reproduction, then the structure of the human lifespan begins to appear in a different light. Growth accelerates toward maturity, systems peak during early adulthood, and gradual change follows. This sequence is visible not only in muscle mass, but also in bone density, cardiovascular performance, and cellular repair capacity. In adolescence and early adulthood, the body is primed for expansion and resilience. Protein synthesis rates are higher, satellite cells that regenerate muscle fibers are more responsive, and hormonal signals promote tissue building. These characteristics align closely with the historical period of life when reproduction and child-rearing demanded physical capability. Beyond that window, the biological emphasis shifts subtly from growth toward maintenance. Skeletal evidence from prehistoric remains supports this pattern. Long bones in young adults often show thickness and density consistent with intense physical use, yet older individuals frequently display thinning cortical bone and joint degeneration. This does not suggest sudden collapse but gradual remodeling. Bone is a living tissue that constantly balances formation and resorption. During youth, formation exceeds resorption, strengthening the skeleton. With age, this balance shifts. The change reflects not merely the passage of time, but a recalibration of biological priorities. The body invests heavily when reproductive and survival demands are highest. Later, investment becomes more conservative. Energy allocation offers another perspective. Every organism operates within a finite energy budget. Calories consumed must be distributed among competing systems: immune defense, brain metabolism, reproduction, movement, and cellular repair. In early adulthood, when reproductive success historically carried the greatest evolutionary consequence, energy is directed toward building and sustaining physical capacity. Over time, however, maintaining large muscle reserves becomes energetically costly relative to other needs. If environmental conditions fluctuate or caloric intake becomes less certain, reducing muscle mass can serve as a metabolic adjustment rather than a failure. The decline of certain hormones across adulthood further illustrates this recalibration. Testosterone in males and estrogen in females rise during puberty and remain elevated through reproductive years. These hormones support muscle growth, bone strength, and tissue repair. With age, their levels gradually decrease. This decline is not abrupt in most individuals. It unfolds slowly over decades. From an evolutionary standpoint, once reproductive potential diminishes, the energetic investment required to sustain maximal hormonal output may offer diminishing returns. The body continues to function, but it no longer prioritizes peak anabolic signaling. This shift can also be understood through the lens of genetic expression. Certain genes are more active in early life, promoting growth and cellular division. As the body ages, patterns of gene expression change. Some repair mechanisms become less efficient, and inflammatory pathways may become more active. These changes accumulate gradually, reflecting the limits of long-term maintenance in systems originally optimized for earlier phases of life. Natural selection, acting most strongly before and during reproduction, has less opportunity to refine these later life processes. In early human populations, where life expectancy was shaped by environmental hazards, the proportion of individuals living many decades past reproductive age was modest. The evolutionary payoff of sustaining peak physical strength far beyond those years would have been limited. Instead, the body evolved to be adequate and adaptable, capable of contributing to group survival in multiple ways as age advanced. Strength remained useful, but it was no longer the central axis of contribution. Knowledge, memory, and social coordination assumed increasing importance. Seen in this way, the gradual reduction in physical strength across adulthood reflects a redistribution of biological emphasis. Growth gives way to preservation, and preservation eventually yields to slow remodeling. This sequence mirrors the demographic realities of our species' origins. The body's architecture carries the imprint of those ancient patterns, in which peak physical capacity was essential but temporary, and long-term maintenance was balanced against finite energetic resources and shifting evolutionary pressures. When viewed across many generations, the human lifespan reveals a consistent pattern: rapid growth toward maturity, a plateau of capability during early adulthood, and gradual change thereafter. This arc did not arise accidentally. It reflects the statistical structure of ancestral populations in which the majority of evolutionary influence was concentrated before and during the years of reproduction. Once individuals had passed that threshold, the forces shaping refinement became quieter. The body continued to function, often for decades, yet the intensity of biological optimization softened. In early human communities, mortality was shaped by infection, injury, childbirth complications, and environmental instability. Those who survived into adulthood represented a smaller subset of the original birth cohort. Within this subset, reproductive success varied. Individuals who were physically capable, socially integrated, and able to support offspring had a higher probability of transmitting genes. The biological systems supporting muscle growth, bone density, and cardiovascular performance were therefore strongly shaped during the years leading to and surrounding reproduction. Beyond those years, selection did not entirely disappear, but its leverage weakened. This weakening creates what evolutionary biologists describe as a gradient of selective pressure across the lifespan. Traits that improve early survival and fertility are vigorously refined. Traits that primarily affect individuals after reproduction face less stringent filtering. Over thousands of generations, this gradient produces bodies that perform impressively in youth, but gradually reveal the limits of long-term maintenance. The inability to remain indefinitely strong is part of this broader pattern. It does not emerge from a single mechanism, but from the cumulative result of energy allocation, hormonal shifts, cellular wear, and reduced evolutionary scrutiny in later life. Archaeological findings provide indirect confirmation of this demographic gradient. Burial sites from various prehistoric regions show a distribution of ages that thins toward advanced old age. Some individuals clearly lived long lives, as indicated by extensive dental wear, spinal degeneration, and remodeled fractures. Their presence demonstrates that longevity was possible, yet their relative scarcity underscores that the average evolutionary context did not center on prolonged old age as the norm. In populations where few individuals lived into their 70s or beyond, there was limited opportunity for natural selection to refine traits that only expressed themselves late in life. This demographic structure shaped not only physical strength but also cellular processes. Mechanisms that prevent cancer, repair DNA damage, and maintain tissue elasticity are highly active in early and midlife. Over time, however, small inefficiencies accumulate. Proteins misfold, mitochondrial function becomes less efficient, and inflammatory signaling may increase subtly. These changes are gradual and multifactorial. Their persistence across human populations suggests that evolution prioritized systems that ensured reproduction and early survival rather than flawless longevity. The social dimension of early human life further reinforces this pattern. Cooperative groups could buffer some of the physical decline of older members. Knowledge of seasonal cycles, tool-making techniques, and medicinal resources often resided with those who had lived long enough to accumulate experience. The value of these contributions did not depend on peak muscular strength. As long as older individuals could communicate, teach, and participate socially, their reduced physical power did not eliminate their importance. Evolution therefore did not need to sustain maximal strength into advanced age to maintain group survival. Across time and geography, this pattern repeats. Strength rises to meet reproductive and survival demands, then slowly adjusts as those demands shift. The body's design reflects probabilities rooted in ancient population structures rather than modern expectations of extended vigor. The demographic landscape of our origins shaped a physiology tuned for adequacy during crucial years and flexibility thereafter. When strength declines, it does so along lines traced by countless generations in which the central measure of evolutionary success was continuity, not perpetual peak performance. The human body operates within a strict energetic economy. Every heartbeat, every neural signal, every immune response draws from a limited supply of energy obtained through food. In ancestral environments, this supply was unpredictable. Periods of abundance alternated with scarcity, and survival depended on how efficiently energy could be allocated. Within this framework, strength was never simply a matter of desire or effort. It was a metabolic investment. Muscle tissue is expensive to build and maintain. It requires continuous protein turnover, hormonal support, and sufficient caloric intake. In landscapes where food could not be guaranteed, Maintaining large reserves of muscle at all times would have posed a risk rather than an advantage. In early hunter-gatherer societies, energy expenditure was high. Long-distance walking, carrying loads, and cooperative hunting demanded endurance. Yet even in such physically demanding contexts, the body balanced performance with conservation. Basal metabolic rate, the energy required to sustain vital functions at rest, already accounted for a significant portion of daily intake. The human brain alone consumes a disproportionate share of energy compared to other primates, reflecting our species' cognitive specialization. When brain metabolism, immune defense, reproduction, and thermoregulation are considered together, the margin for maintaining excessive muscle mass narrows. Evolution favored a body capable of generating strength when needed, but also capable of reducing that investment when circumstances changed. Archaeological and ethnographic studies of traditional foraging populations reveal that caloric intake could fluctuate seasonally. During dry or cold periods, resources diminished. Under such conditions, the body shifted priorities. Glycogen stores were depleted, fat reserves were mobilized, and, if scarcity persisted, muscle proteins were broken down to support essential organs. This process, while often perceived negatively in modern contexts, represents a survival mechanism embedded deeply in human physiology. Muscle served not only as a means of exertion but also as a reservoir of amino acids that could be converted into energy. The capacity to relinquish muscle during hardship enhanced survival probability. The same principle applies to the gradual loss of strength across adulthood. As reproductive demands decline and hormonal profiles shift, the energetic incentive to maintain peak muscle mass weakens. Anabolic processes slow, and catabolic processes subtly gain influence. This shift is not abrupt. It unfolds gradually over years. It mirrors the broader evolutionary logic in which efficiency outweighs permanence. Maintaining maximal strength indefinitely would require sustained high energy intake and constant repair. In ancestral conditions, neither was assured across decades. The energy trade-offs become even clearer when considering immune function. Early humans faced frequent exposure to pathogens, parasites, and injuries. Mounting an immune response is metabolically costly. Fever, inflammation, and tissue repair divert energy from other systems. In a body already managing limited resources, allocating energy toward immediate survival threats could reduce investment in muscle maintenance. Over time, repeated episodes of infection or injury would cumulatively affect physical capacity. The body prioritized survival in the present rather than preserving muscle for an uncertain future. The transition to agriculture did not eliminate this energetic balancing act. Although food production increased stability in some regions, diets often became less diverse, and nutritional deficiencies were common. Skeletal remains from early farming communities frequently show signs of stress markers, such as enamel hyperplasia, indicating childhood malnutrition. Reduced nutritional quality would have influenced muscle development and long-term strength. Even in more stable settlements, energy distribution remained a central constraint shaping bodily performance. Viewed from the perspective of energy economics, the inability to remain strong forever appears as a rational outcome. The human organism evolved under conditions where energy had to be carefully allocated among competing priorities. Muscle mass was beneficial, but costly. The body therefore developed mechanisms to adjust strength in response to environmental and life stage demands. From our earliest origins, strength was a flexible resource, rising with necessity and receding when conservation served survival more effectively. Energy within the human body is never stored or spent without consequence. Every gram of muscle represents accumulated protein synthesis, hormonal signaling, and caloric surplus. Yet the same tissue that allows lifting, carrying, and resisting force also increases daily energy requirements. In ancestral settings, where caloric intake was uncertain, this created a delicate balance. A body too heavily invested in muscle risked higher energy demands during scarcity. A body too lightly invested risked inadequate performance during hunting or defense. Evolution favored a middle ground shaped by fluctuating conditions rather than by the pursuit of permanent physical maximums. This balance can be understood through the principle of life history trade-offs. Organisms allocate energy among growth, maintenance, reproduction, and storage. In early life, growth dominates. During reproductive years, both maintenance and reproductive effort intensify. As the likelihood of reproduction declines, the allocation shifts again. The body does not have unlimited resources. Increasing investment in one domain often reduces investment elsewhere. Sustaining large amounts of muscle indefinitely would require continued high allocation toward maintenance, potentially at the expense of immune defense, neural function, or reproductive processes. In environments where survival threats were immediate and varied, flexibility offered a safer evolutionary strategy than rigidity. The human brain's energetic cost further clarifies this pattern. Compared to other primates, humans possess an enlarged cerebral cortex that supports planning, language, and social coordination. This neural expansion carries metabolic consequences. At rest, the brain consumes a substantial portion of total energy expenditure. In early development, this proportion is even higher. Maintaining such an energetically expensive organ may have limited the degree to which muscle mass could also be permanently expanded. The body's architecture reflects compromise. Cognitive sophistication increased, while reliance on extreme muscular strength decreased. Cooperative hunting, tool use, and social strategy reduced the necessity for raw, sustained power. Ethnographic observations of traditional foraging societies show that daily physical activity levels are high, yet extreme muscular hypertrophy is uncommon. Strength is functional rather than maximal. Individuals are capable of enduring long treks and performing demanding tasks, but they do not maintain the high muscle volumes associated with modern athletic specialization. This suggests that the ancestral template of strength was tuned for endurance and adaptability rather than for preserving peak output across decades. When workloads decline, muscle mass declines. When workloads intensify, muscle can rebuild. The system remains responsive rather than fixed. Hormonal regulation reinforces this responsiveness. Anabolic hormones that promote muscle growth are sensitive to nutrition, stress, and age. Cortisol, released during stress or prolonged energy deficit, promotes the breakdown of muscle tissue to supply glucose. This mechanism ensures survival during acute threats but reduces strength when sustained. In ancestral contexts marked by intermittent stressors, predator encounters, territorial conflict, climate shifts, temporary catabolic states would have been common. The body adapted to recover when conditions improved, yet each cycle of breakdown and rebuilding carried cumulative effects over time. Even within a single lifespan, seasonal variation likely shaped muscle dynamics. During periods of abundant food, muscle tissue could be rebuilt or maintained. During scarcity, it served as a reserve. Over decades, repeated fluctuations would gradually alter overall capacity. The body did not operate under the expectation of uninterrupted abundance. Its regulatory systems evolved to handle cycles, not constancy. From this perspective, the gradual loss of strength in adulthood mirrors the broader ecological rhythms that shaped human evolution. Energy allocation shifts according to life stage and environmental input. Muscle, while valuable, competes with other biological imperatives. The architecture of the human body reveals a design optimized for balance within uncertainty. It was never meant to hold strength at a permanent peak, because the conditions under which it evolved rarely allowed such permanence. Across long spans of evolutionary time, the human body learned to treat energy not as something abundant, but as something to be guarded. In unpredictable climates, where drought could follow abundance and migration could follow settlement, survival favored those who conserved as carefully as they exerted. Muscle, though powerful, is metabolically active even at rest. Each kilogram of lean tissue increases daily energy requirements. In times of scarcity, that requirement becomes a liability. The body therefore evolved regulatory systems that monitor availability and adjust accordingly. Strength was shaped not only by mechanical load, but by signals of energy sufficiency. One of these signals is insulin sensitivity. When energy intake is high and consistent, muscle tissue readily absorbs glucose and amino acids, supporting growth and repair. When intake falls or stress hormones rise, insulin sensitivity shifts, and the body becomes more conservative in allocating nutrients to muscle. Instead, it preserves glucose for the brain and essential organs. This metabolic hierarchy reflects evolutionary priorities. Cognition and immediate survival take precedence over maintaining maximal physical power. In this hierarchy, muscle is adaptable capital, not untouchable infrastructure. Mitochondria, the cellular structures responsible for energy production, also reveal this pattern. In youth, mitochondrial function tends to be efficient, supporting sustained activity and repair. Over decades, oxidative stress accumulates, and mitochondrial efficiency can decline. The body compensates through various mechanisms, yet repair is never absolute. Small inefficiencies compound over time. These changes are subtle, often imperceptible in early adulthood, but they gradually influence endurance and strength. From an evolutionary perspective, perfect preservation of mitochondrial integrity into advanced age would have offered limited reproductive advantage in ancestral populations. Maintenance systems therefore evolved to be sufficient rather than flawless. The immune system illustrates a similar trade-off. Acute inflammation aids in healing injuries and fighting infection, yet chronic low-grade inflammation may gradually affect muscle tissue and joint integrity. In ancestral environments with frequent pathogen exposure, the immune system's responsiveness was essential. However, sustained immune activation also diverts energy from growth and repair. Over many years, repeated immune challenges leave cumulative effects. The body prioritizes survival from immediate threats, even if long-term tissue resilience is modestly compromised. Climate variability reinforces this dynamic. Ice ages, shifting rainfall patterns, and ecological transitions altered food sources and activity demands across generations. The ability to down-regulate energy expenditure during harsh conditions increased survival odds. Muscle mass could be reduced, metabolic rate adjusted, and reproduction delayed when necessary. These flexible responses were advantageous in fluctuating environments. A rigid commitment to maintaining peak strength regardless of context would have reduced adaptability. When agriculture emerged, and later when industrialization reshaped daily life, energy availability in some regions became more stable. Yet the physiological systems regulating strength remained rooted in older patterns. They continue to respond to stress, nutrition, and age with adjustments shaped by ancient scarcity. Even in modern abundance, anabolic signaling decreases gradually with age, and muscle protein synthesis becomes less efficient. These patterns reflect a design optimized for earlier demographic realities rather than contemporary expectations of lifelong physical vigor. Within this broader evolutionary economy, strength appears as a negotiated outcome rather than a permanent state. It rises in youth when growth signals and reproductive urgency converge. It fluctuates with environmental conditions. It gradually yields as repair systems face cumulative wear and energy priorities shift. None of these processes imply malfunction. They reveal a body tuned to balance within uncertainty. The human organism was shaped to endure cycles, not to remain fixed at a summit. Strength was always part of a larger strategy in which adaptability, energy conservation, and survival across unpredictable landscapes held equal or greater weight. Every movement leaves a trace. When early humans lifted stone tools, carried water, or walked across uneven ground, microscopic stresses passed through muscle fibers, tendons, cartilage, and bone. These stresses were not dramatic events. They were small disruptions repeated thousands of times. In youth, the body responded to such disruptions with efficient repair. Muscle fibers rebuilt stronger after strain. Bone tissue thickened where pressure was greatest, and connective tissues adapted to repeated use. This responsiveness allowed strength to develop in relation to activity. Yet the same cycle of stress and repair carried an inherent limitation. Repair restored function, but it rarely restored tissues to an untouched state. Over decades, minor imperfections accumulated. Skeletal remains from prehistoric sites reveal this pattern clearly. Long bones often show robust development in younger adults, consistent with high physical activity. At the same time, signs of osteoarthritis, joint surface wear, and spinal compression become more frequent in individuals who lived longer. These findings suggest that even in populations accustomed to physical labor from childhood, the mechanical burden of daily life gradually altered tissue structure. Strength allowed work to be performed, but work itself introduced micro-damage. The two were inseparable. Cartilage offers a quiet example of this dynamic. It cushions joints and allows smooth motion, yet it has limited blood supply and regenerates slowly. Repeated compression over years subtly changes its structure. In early life, collagen fibers remain organized and resilient. With time, cross-linking increases and elasticity decreases. These changes do not necessarily produce immediate pain or disability. They unfold gradually, reflecting a system capable of maintenance but not complete renewal. The evolutionary context of this limitation is clear. Perfect regeneration into advanced age would have offered modest reproductive advantage in ancestral populations. Adequate function through key life stages was sufficient. Muscle tissue follows a similar arc. When young adults in prehistoric communities engaged in repetitive hunting, gathering, or tool-making, muscle fibers experienced microscopic tears. Satellite cells activated to repair and reinforce damaged areas. Over time, however, the pool of these regenerative cells declines, and the inflammatory response that initiates repair becomes less tightly regulated. The capacity to rebuild remains, but its efficiency gradually shifts. This change does not represent a single failure. It reflects cumulative exposure to stress within a body calibrated for earlier demographic realities. Archaeological evidence of healed fractures further illustrates the interplay between strength and vulnerability. Many prehistoric skeletons show bones that fractured and then healed, sometimes with slight misalignment. Survival after such injuries indicates community care and the resilience of biological repair systems. Yet even healed bones often bear subtle structural differences from their original form. Over a lifetime, repeated injuries, even minor ones, leave layered imprints. The body restores functionality, but not complete erasure of history. Environmental conditions shape the pace of this accumulation. Uneven terrain, seasonal migrations, and the need to transport resources placed continuous mechanical load on joints and connective tissues. Unlike modern environments with controlled surfaces and specialized equipment, early human landscapes were irregular and demanding. Each step over rocky ground transmitted force through ankles and knees. Each carried loads stressed shoulders and spine. Strength made these actions possible, yet the actions themselves slowly altered the very tissues that enabled them. From this perspective, the inability to remain strong forever emerges as a natural outcome of repeated use within imperfect repair systems. The human body was designed to respond, to rebuild sufficiently, and to continue functioning through cycles of strain. It was not designed for infinite restoration. Microdamage is not an anomaly. It is an inevitable companion of activity. Over decades, the accumulation of such damage reshapes muscle, bone, and connective tissue. Strength rises to meet the demands of youth, yet the marks of those demands quietly persist, reminding us that repair, though remarkable, is never absolute. Over time, the accumulation of microscopic damage does not remain evenly distributed. Certain joints bear more load than others, certain muscles are recruited more frequently, and certain postures are repeated daily. In early human environments, repetitive tasks were not isolated events but ongoing patterns shaped by landscape and survival strategies. Grinding grain, carrying infants, hauling firewood, shaping tools, or rowing simple watercraft each placed specific mechanical stresses on the body. These stresses left identifiable signatures in skeletal remains. Archaeologists often detect asymmetry in limb bones, indicating dominant side use, and localized joint degeneration consistent with habitual labor. Strength enabled these activities, yet the repetition embedded subtle strain into tissue architecture. Bone adapts dynamically to load. When mechanical stress increases, osteoblasts deposit new bone matrix, thickening regions under pressure. This adaptive capacity explains the robust appearance of many prehistoric skeletons. However, bone remodeling is not infinite. As individuals age, the balance between bone formation and resorption gradually shifts. Osteoclast activity may begin to outpace formation, especially when hormonal signals change. The result is a slow reduction in bone density. This process unfolds over years rather than days, and it reflects systemic recalibration rather than sudden failure. From an evolutionary perspective, sustaining sufficient skeletal integrity through reproductive and early post-reproductive years was adequate for population continuity. Absolute preservation into advanced age was not strictly required. Tendons and ligaments, composed largely of collagen, respond more slowly to mechanical stress than muscle or bone. Their blood supply is limited, and healing after injury can be prolonged. Repeated microstrains alter collagen alignment and elasticity. In youth, these tissues recover more completely. With age, collagen cross-linking increases, reducing flexibility and resilience. Such biochemical changes accumulate quietly, often without immediate symptoms. They reflect the cumulative imprint of decades of use within systems that were optimized for adaptability rather than perpetual renewal. The environment further modulated these patterns. Seasonal cold-stiffened joints and reduced circulation, extended migrations over uneven terrain increased cumulative impact forces. Periods of malnutrition slowed tissue repair. Skeletal markers, known as stress indicators, such as periosteal reactions or enthesopathies at tendon attachment sites, demonstrate that many individuals experience repeated mechanical strain. These markers are not evidence of catastrophic injury but of long-term use. Strength allowed survival within demanding landscapes, yet the very act of surviving shaped the body's structure over time. Cellular processes mirror these structural changes. Each cycle of muscle contraction produces reactive oxygen species as a byproduct of metabolism. In youth, antioxidant systems neutralize much of this oxidative stress. Over decades, however, small amounts of damage persist. Proteins oxidize, lipids alter, and mitochondrial DNA accumulates mutations. Repair mechanisms remain active but cannot eliminate every imperfection. The accumulation is gradual, often invisible externally, yet it subtly influences tissue performance. Importantly, this cumulative wear does not imply that the body is poorly designed. It suggests instead that design was oriented towards sufficiency within ecological constraints. The capacity to repair most damage and continue functioning was far more advantageous than the unrealistic alternative of perfect restoration. In ancestral settings where average lifespan was shaped by external hazards, maintaining high performance through key life stages ensured reproductive success. Beyond that, gradual structural shifts did not prevent individuals from contributing socially or cognitively. Thus, the body's inability to sustain maximal strength indefinitely reflects a layered history of mechanical use, biochemical change, and evolutionary prioritization. Strength emerges, adapts, and supports survival. Microdamage accumulates. Repair mitigates but does not erase it, and tissues slowly remodel under the weight of experience. Across decades, the traces of movement, labor, and environment converge. The human organism carries within its bones and connective tissues the record of its own activity, revealing that endurance was favored, but permanence was never guaranteed. Even when repair systems function efficiently, they operate within biological boundaries. Cells divide, proteins are replaced, and damaged fibers are reinforced. Yet every cycle of repair depends on signaling pathways that change with age. In early adulthood, growth factors circulate at higher levels. Inflammation is tightly regulated, and tissue regeneration proceeds with relative speed. As decades pass, the balance between damage and restoration gradually shifts. This shift is not dramatic. It is cumulative. It reflects the quiet arithmetic of time, acting on systems that were calibrated for adequacy rather than permanence. Within muscle tissue, the regenerative process depends on satellite cells' specialized stem cells that activate in response to injury or strain. In youth, these cells respond quickly, proliferate, and fuse with damaged fibers, restoring strength. Over time, the number and responsiveness of satellite cells decline. The local environment of the muscle changes as well, with increased inflammatory signaling and altered extracellular matrix composition. Repair continues, but it becomes less precise and less complete. Each cycle of strain leaves a slightly different structural imprint. The body maintains function, yet the texture of tissue gradually evolves. Bone remodeling follows a comparable trajectory. Microcracks form in response to repetitive load, and specialized cells detect and repair them. In younger individuals, the coordination between bone formation and resorption maintains density and strength. With age, hormonal changes, particularly reductions in estrogen and testosterone, alter this coordination. Bone turnover may become less balanced, leading to gradual thinning. Archaeological evidence from long-lived individuals often reveals porous bone surfaces and vertebral compression, signs of accumulated structural change. These findings are consistent across regions and eras, suggesting a shared biological pattern rather than isolated pathology. Cartilage and connective tissues reveal another dimension of limitation. Collagen fibers provide tensile strength and flexibility, yet they are susceptible to chemical modification over time. Non-enzymatic glycation, a process in which sugars bind to proteins, increases with age and reduces tissue elasticity. This process occurs slowly and is influenced by metabolic factors. In ancestral environments with variable diets, such chemical alterations would still have accumulated gradually across decades. Elastic tissues that once absorbed force smoothly begin to transmit stress more directly to joints and bone. The sensation of stiffness that accompanies aging reflects structural shifts that unfolded quietly for years. Environmental exposure intensified these processes. Repeated lifting, climbing, digging, and walking over uneven ground magnified microscopic wear. Cold temperatures stiffened connective tissue, increasing susceptibility to strain. Episodes of malnutrition or illness slowed recovery. Skeletal remains from diverse prehistoric populations consistently show patterns of joint degeneration by midlife, reinforcing the idea that cumulative mechanical stress was universal rather than exceptional. Strength enabled individuals to meet environmental demands, yet those demands imprinted themselves on the body in lasting ways. From an evolutionary standpoint, perfect maintenance of regenerative capacity into advanced old age would have required substantial metabolic investment. In populations where relatively few individuals survived into deep old age, such investment would have provided limited reproductive return. Instead, natural selection favored repair systems that were robust during early and midlife, sufficient to support survival and reproduction, while tolerating gradual decline thereafter. The human body therefore carries a built-in asymmetry between building and rebuilding. Growth during youth is expansive and efficient. Repair during later life is steady but increasingly conservative. Over time, microdamage, hormonal recalibration, and environmental imprint converge. Strength fades not because repair ceases, but because repair operates within boundaries shaped by ancient demographic realities. The architecture of our tissues reflects a compromise forged across millennia, enough resilience to endure repeated strain, yet not the infinite restoration required for perpetual strength. Repair within the human body is often described as remarkable, and in many ways it is. Cuts close, fractures mend, and muscle fibers rebuild after strain. Yet repair is never identical to original construction. It is an act of restoration under constraint, shaped by available energy, hormonal signals, and cellular accuracy. From the earliest stages of life, tissues are built with a degree of redundancy and flexibility that allows for correction. As time advances, however, repair mechanisms must operate in environments that are increasingly complex, carrying the imprint of prior strain and metabolic shifts. The result is not failure, but approximation. At the level of DNA, cells continuously correct errors that arise during replication or from environmental stress. Specialized enzymes detect mismatched bases and repair them. In youth, these systems function with high efficiency. Over decades, the cumulative burden of replication errors, oxidative stress, and environmental exposure increases. Repair enzymes remain active, yet they cannot achieve absolute precision indefinitely. Small variations persist, most of which are harmless, but together they reflect the biological reality that perfection is not sustainable across long spans of time. Evolution did not require flawless genomic maintenance into extreme old age. It required sufficient stability through reproductive and socially active years. Muscle repair illustrates this principle in a tangible way. When fibers are damaged through exertion, inflammatory signals initiate cleanup and rebuilding. This process depends on coordinated communication between immune cells and satellite cells. In younger individuals, this coordination is swift and balanced. With age, inflammatory responses may become slightly prolonged and regenerative signals less robust. Repair still occurs, but the rebuilt tissue may differ subtly in fiber composition or alignment. These small deviations accumulate. Strength remains functional, yet maximal capacity gradually narrows. Connective tissue repair also reflects constraint. Collagen deposition after injury restores tensile strength, but the new arrangement of fibers is rarely identical to the original structure. Scar tissue can provide durability, yet it may lack elasticity. In early life, repeated minor injuries are absorbed into a resilient matrix. Over decades, repeated cycles of deposition and remodeling subtly alter mechanical properties. The body prioritizes stability and continuity of function over perfect restoration of initial architecture. Energy availability influences every stage of this process. Repair requires protein synthesis, immune coordination, and cellular division, all energetically expensive tasks. In ancestral environments characterized by periodic scarcity, repair efficiency likely fluctuated with nutritional status. During abundance, rebuilding could proceed more fully. During scarcity, conservation of energy may have slowed or limited repair. Over a lifetime shaped by such cycles, tissues would carry the layered imprint of variable restoration. Archaeological evidence reinforces this interpretation. Healed fractures and remodeled joint surfaces demonstrate that repair mechanisms were sufficiently robust to allow survival after injury. Yet the presence of malunions and degenerative changes indicates that restoration was often incomplete. Communities supported individuals through these changes, allowing social contribution even as physical capacity shifted. Evolution, therefore, did not need to engineer flawless regeneration. It needed to ensure adequate recovery for survival and participation within the group. Within this broader context, the inability of the human body to remain strong forever reflects the nature of repair itself. Restoration is always an act within limits biochemical, energetic, and demographic. The body was shaped to correct enough damage to sustain life and reproduction, not to erase every trace of time. Over decades, small imperfections accumulate, and tissues evolve in response to prior strain. Strength, once built through efficient growth and repair, gradually reflects the history of those repairs. The pattern is not abrupt decline, but steady recalibration within boundaries set long before modern expectations of longevity emerged. Repair depends not only on cellular machinery, but also on the signals that coordinate it. Within the human body, healing is initiated by a cascade of chemical messengers that regulate inflammation, growth, and remodeling. In youth, this cascade tends to be tightly balanced. Inflammation rises quickly to contain damage and remove debris, then subsides as regeneration begins. Growth factors stimulate new tissue formation, and remodeling gradually restores structural integrity. This orchestration allows strength to rebound after strain, yet the same signaling network evolves across the lifespan. The precision that characterizes early repair slowly shifts as hormonal environments and immune profiles change. Inflammation illustrates this transition clearly. Acute inflammation is protective and necessary, but chronic low-grade inflammation may emerge with age. This persistent state, sometimes described in scientific literature as inflammaging, reflects subtle immune recalibration rather than overt disease. Elevated baseline inflammatory markers can influence how tissues respond to new injury. Muscle repair may proceed more slowly, and collagen deposition may become less orderly. The body continues to heal, yet the tempo and symmetry of restoration differ from earlier decades. This change does not represent malfunction alone. It reflects cumulative exposure to pathogens, stressors, and metabolic fluctuations experienced over a lifetime shaped by ancestral conditions. Hormonal modulation further shapes repair capacity. Growth hormone and insulin-like growth factor play central roles in tissue regeneration during youth. Their levels decline gradually with age, influencing protein synthesis and cellular proliferation. Sex hormones also modulate bone density and muscle maintenance. As estrogen and testosterone decrease, remodeling balance shifts. These hormonal trajectories are not arbitrary. They align with reproductive patterns established in early human populations. Once reproductive capacity waned, evolutionary pressure to sustain maximal anabolic signaling diminished. Repair remained functional but increasingly conservative. Nutritional context interacts with these internal signals. Protein availability, micronutrient intake, and overall caloric balance directly affect tissue rebuilding. In prehistoric settings, periods of nutritional abundance alternated with scarcity. Repair efficiency likely mirrored these cycles. During resource-rich seasons, injuries healed more fully. During lean periods, conservation took priority. Over decades of fluctuating intake, tissues accumulated a record of variable restoration. The body adapted sufficiently to ensure survival, yet perfection was not guaranteed under constrained energy budgets. Archaeological markers offer insight into these processes. Sites across continents reveal individuals with partially healed injuries or degenerative joint surfaces, consistent with repeated stress. The fact that such individuals survived implies that repair was adequate for functional continuation. At the same time, the structural evidence of remodeling indicates that healing did not always recreate the original architecture. Communities compensated through cooperation and shared labor, reducing the evolutionary demand for flawless physical restoration in later life. Cellular senescence adds another layer to this pattern. As cells divide repeatedly over time, some enter a state in which they remain metabolically active but no longer proliferate. These senescent cells contribute to altered tissue environments and may influence repair efficiency. In early life, mechanisms exist to remove or limit such cells. Over decades, their accumulation becomes more common. This gradual shift subtly affects regenerative capacity. Evolution did not eliminate senescence entirely because its impact typically manifests beyond peak reproductive years. Within this network of inflammatory signaling, hormonal modulation, nutritional fluctuation, and cellular aging, repair unfolds as a negotiated process. It restores functionality, yet it does so within boundaries shaped by energy availability and evolutionary priorities. Strength, rebuilt many times across youth and adulthood, gradually reflects the history of those negotiations. The body remains resilient, yet its restorative processes become more measured. Across decades, this measured repair contributes to the steady recalibration of physical capacity that characterizes the human lifespan. Over the course of a lifetime, repair is repeated so many times that it becomes part of the body's quiet background rhythm. Muscles strain and recover, joints compress and stabilize, cells divide and replace themselves. Each cycle is sufficient to maintain function, yet each cycle also leaves subtle residue. What distinguishes early life from later decades is not the presence or absence of repair, but the precision with which it restores original form. In youth, repair tends to approximate renewal. With age, it more often approximates reinforcement. The difference is slight at first, but it accumulates across time. At the molecular level, proteins are constantly synthesized and degraded in a process known as turnover. In muscle tissue, this turnover allows adaptation to activity. During early adulthood, the balance between synthesis and degradation favors growth when stimulated. Later in life, the same stimulus may produce a smaller increase in synthesis, even when nutrition and exercise are adequate. The signaling pathways that once amplified repair become more restrained. This does not eliminate strength, but it narrows the margin by which it can expand or fully recover after strain. Connective tissues reveal a parallel pattern. The extracellular matrix that surrounds cells is composed of proteins such as collagen and elastin. These molecules provide structural integrity and elasticity. Over decades, chemical modifications accumulate within this matrix. Some crosslinks strengthen tissue against tearing, yet they also reduce flexibility. Repair processes continue to patch microinjuries, but the rebuilt matrix may differ slightly in composition from the original. As cycles repeat, tissues become more resistant in some respects and less adaptable in others. Strength remains possible, yet its character subtly changes. Immune regulation further influences this shift. The immune system, shaped by years of exposure to pathogens and environmental stressors, recalibrates its baseline activity. Even mild, persistent inflammation can alter the local environment in which repair occurs. Growth signals may compete with inflammatory cues, producing slower or less symmetrical restoration. These changes are gradual and often unnoticed in daily life, yet they contribute to the broader trajectory of physical recalibration. The body continues to maintain, but its maintenance becomes measured rather than expansive. From an evolutionary perspective, this gradual shift reflects realistic boundaries. Natural selection strongly favored repair mechanisms that preserved reproductive capacity and survival during early and midlife. Beyond those stages, the evolutionary incentive to perfect long-term regenerative precision diminished. Communities often compensated for declining strength through cooperation, allowing individuals to remain socially integrated even as physical resilience adjusted. The biological system therefore evolved to ensure adequacy across critical periods rather than flawless restoration across extreme longevity. Archaeological findings reinforce this interpretation. Healed injuries and remodeled joints show that repair mechanisms functioned reliably enough to sustain life and participation within groups. Yet the visible traces of past strain reveal that each restoration carried forward a small imprint of its history. Over decades, these imprints accumulated. The skeleton, preserved in soil long after life has ended, becomes a record of repair that was sufficient, not perfect. In this context, the inability of the human body to remain strong forever emerges not from abrupt breakdown, but from incremental recalibration. Repair never stops, but its fidelity shifts. Strength persists, yet it is shaped by the layered outcomes of countless restorative acts carried out within energetic and evolutionary limits. The body carries forward the memory of its own efforts, embodying a compromise between resilience and realism that has accompanied our species since its earliest beginnings. For most of human existence, the environment did not remain stable long enough for the body to assume permanence. Landscapes shifted with climate, resources fluctuated with season, and communities adapted through movement rather than by expecting the world to accommodate them. In such settings, physical strength was tied closely to immediate context. It expanded in response to necessity and contracted when circumstances demanded conservation. The body learned to read signals from its surroundings, temperature, workload, nutrition, stress, and adjust accordingly. Stability across decades was not the expectation encoded into its physiology. The transition from nomadic foraging to more settled agricultural life introduced a subtle change. With cultivation came more predictable access to food in some regions, yet also new forms of repetitive labor. Fields required constant tending, grain required grinding, and domesticated animals required care. While this reduced certain migratory pressures, it replaced them with sustained localized strain. Skeletal evidence from early farming populations often shows patterns of joint wear in the spine, knees, and hands consistent with repetitive tasks. The environment shifted from fluctuating terrain to continuous labor, yet the body remained governed by systems designed for adaptability rather than unbroken stability. In more recent centuries, technological and industrial developments further altered the relationship between environment and physiology. Physical demands in many societies decreased, while caloric availability increased. The body, however, continues to operate according to regulatory principles shaped by scarcity and variability. When workload diminishes, muscle mass declines unless actively maintained. When activity becomes repetitive but limited in range, certain muscle groups weaken while others tighten. These patterns reflect responsiveness rather than malfunction. The organism recalibrates to its perceived environment, conserving energy when physical challenge appears reduced. This responsiveness is rooted in evolutionary history. Muscle protein synthesis is stimulated by mechanical load and adequate nutrition. Remove either element, and the stimulus for maintenance diminishes. In ancestral settings, such fluctuations were common. During periods of migration or intense hunting, strength would have been reinforced. During times of reduced activity or limited intake, it would have receded. The body evolved to track these variations closely. What modern individuals interpret as loss may simply be the continuation of this ancient tracking system operating within new conditions. Environmental stresses beyond physical labor also influence strength. Temperature, pathogen exposure, and psychological stress all modulate hormonal balance and immune activity. In early human populations, seasonal cold or heat altered metabolic demand. Illness diverted energy from muscle maintenance toward immune defense. Over time, these repeated environmental inputs shaped the trajectory of physical capacity. The body did not exist in isolation from climate or community. It was continuously negotiating with them. Archaeological and anthropological research shows that even within similar geographic regions, variations in lifestyle produced measurable differences in skeletal robustness. Groups engaged in high mobility and diverse activity patterns often display distinct musculoskeletal adaptations compared to those practicing more sedentary or repetitive labor. This variation demonstrates that strength is highly context-dependent. It is not an inherent fixed quantity, but a reflection of ongoing dialogue between organism and environment. Seen through this lens, the inability to remain strong forever becomes inseparable from environmental change. As the world shifts from open savannas to cultivated fields to industrial cities, the body continues to recalibrate according to signals it interprets as necessity or excess. It conserves when challenge declines, and rebuilds when challenge returns. Permanence was never embedded into its regulatory logic. Instead, adaptability was selected across generations living within unstable landscapes. Strength, therefore, was designed to fluctuate alongside environment, not to remain immune to it across an extended and historically unusual span of comfort and longevity. As human environments became more predictable in certain regions, the signals that once drove constant physical recalibration began to change. In early agricultural villages, food supply was tied to harvest cycles rather than daily foraging success. This stability reduced some forms of immediate scarcity, yet it also narrowed the diversity of diet. Archaeological evidence from Neolithic sites often reveals reduced stature and signs of nutritional stress compared to some earlier foraging populations. Although food was more consistently available, it was sometimes less varied and less nutrient-dense. The body adapted once again not toward perpetual strength but toward functioning within the nutritional boundaries of the new setting. Repetition replaced variability. Instead of traversing long distances across shifting terrain, many individuals repeated similar motions, daily ploughing fields, grinding grain, carrying water from fixed sources. Repetitive strain produced localized adaptations. Bones thickened in specific regions, while joints in those same regions displayed degenerative changes over time. The musculoskeletal system adjusted to repeated demands. Yet this adjustment did not equate to sustained maximal strength across the entire body. Strength became specialized and context-bound. With the rise of larger settlements and later industrial societies, another transformation occurred. Mechanization gradually reduced the physical load required for survival tasks. Transportation systems replaced long migrations. Tools and machines replaced some forms of manual labor. Caloric intake in many regions increased, yet daily mechanical stimulus to muscle tissue decreased. The body's regulatory systems, however, remained sensitive to mechanical load as the primary signal for maintaining muscle mass. When load diminished, anabolic signaling receded. Muscle atrophy under reduced use is not a defect. It is a deeply conserved biological response. In ancestral contexts, conserving energy during reduced activity would have enhanced survival during unpredictable scarcity. Climate control further altered environmental signals. Heating and cooling technologies minimized seasonal metabolic challenges. The thermogenic demands that once required muscular shivering or metabolic adjustment became less pronounced. The body continues to possess mechanisms for responding to temperature extremes, but modern insulation reduces their activation. Over time, this reduction in environmental stress subtly reshapes metabolic priorities. The organism interprets relative stability as reduced necessity for certain forms of physical investment. Psychological stress, though different in form from ancestral threats, also influences strength through hormonal pathways. Chronic stress can elevate cortisol, promoting catabolism of muscle tissue when sustained. In prehistoric environments, acute stress responses were episodic and tied to immediate survival events. In more complex societies, stress may persist in less tangible forms. The endocrine system does not distinguish sharply between types of stress. It responds to perceived threat. Over years, such hormonal patterns can subtly influence muscle maintenance and repair. Anthropological comparisons between physically active traditional communities and more sedentary urban populations reveal measurable differences in muscle mass, bone density, and metabolic health. These differences underscore the body's enduring responsiveness to environment. Strength increases when activity demands it and diminishes when signals of necessity decline. The organism does not preserve peak strength simply because it once possessed it. It recalibrates continuously, aligning tissue investment with perceived context. From the perspective of evolutionary history, This recalibration is entirely consistent. The human body was forged in dynamic landscapes where flexibility conferred advantage. When the environment signaled abundance and low physical demand, conserving energy would have increased resilience against future scarcity. Modern stability is historically recent. The physiological systems that regulate muscle mass and strength still operate according to ancient principles. They respond to load, nutrition, stress, and climate in ways that prioritize efficiency over permanence. In this continuity between past and present, the gradual fading of strength appears less as an anomaly and more as the extension of a long-standing dialogue between organism and world. In the present era, many human environments are marked by relative comfort and predictability compared to ancestral conditions. Food can often be obtained without physical exertion, temperatures are regulated indoors, and transportation minimizes daily movement. Yet the physiological systems governing strength have not been redesigned for this stability. They continue to respond to mechanical load, nutritional input, and stress according to principles shaped in fluctuating landscapes. When mechanical challenge decreases, signaling pathways that sustain muscle mass become less active. This adjustment reflects a conserved strategy. Invest where necessity is detected, conserve where it is not. The concept often described as evolutionary mismatch emerges from this contrast. The body evolved in contexts where movement was integral to survival, where hunting, gathering, and migration required sustained physical engagement. In those settings, maintaining a certain baseline of strength was adaptive, because daily life continually reinforced it. In modern settings, physical activity may become optional rather than unavoidable. Without consistent stimulus, muscle protein synthesis declines. The body interprets reduced demand as a signal to reallocate energy toward other systems. Strength diminishes not from immediate damage, but from altered context. Anthropological research comparing highly active subsistence populations with sedentary industrial populations demonstrates clear differences in muscle mass and metabolic profiles. Groups engaged in daily physically demanding tasks often maintain lean body composition and robust musculoskeletal structures into midlife. These observations reinforce the principle that strength remains closely tied to environmental input. However, even within these active populations, age-related shifts still occur. Hormonal changes, cumulative wear, and energy allocation patterns continue to influence physical capacity. Environmental engagement can slow recalibration, but it does not entirely prevent it. Urban environments introduce additional layers of influence. Prolonged sitting alters muscle activation patterns, leading to selective weakening in certain regions. Repetitive limited-range movements shape posture and joint mechanics differently than the varied terrain of ancestral landscapes. Over years, such patterns contribute to localized imbalances rather than generalized strength. The body adapts precisely to the tasks it performs. When those tasks narrow, the adaptation narrows as well. Nutrition also interacts with this new stability. Caloric abundance without proportional mechanical demand can lead to energy surplus stored as adipose tissue rather than muscle. Hormonal signaling influenced by excess intake may shift metabolic priorities. While adequate protein and resistance training can stimulate muscle maintenance, these interventions must deliberately counteract default regulatory tendencies. The organism does not inherently preserve peak strength in the absence of ongoing stimulus. It continues to conserve in alignment with perceived need. Psychosocial factors further modulate this recalibration. Chronic low-grade stress, sleep disruption, and altered circadian rhythms influence hormonal balance and tissue repair. In ancestral contexts, stress responses were acute and episodic. Modern patterns may prolong these responses, subtly affecting muscle maintenance over time. The endocrine system remains guided by evolutionary programming that prioritizes immediate survival signals over long-term strength preservation. When viewed across centuries of environmental change, the pattern becomes clear. From open savannas to agricultural fields to industrial cities, the human body has consistently adapted to prevailing conditions. It does not cling to a fixed summit of strength. It adjusts to context. In stable environments with reduced physical demand, it conserves. In challenging environments, it rebuilds. This responsiveness is evidence of evolutionary continuity rather than failure. The architecture of strength was never intended to defy environmental input indefinitely. It was designed to fluctuate alongside the world it inhabits, reflecting ancient priorities that persist beneath modern comfort. Across the human lifespan, hormonal rhythms act as quiet architects of strength. These chemical messengers regulate growth, muscle protein synthesis, bone density, and recovery. In early adolescence, a surge of growth hormone and sex hormones transforms the body from its childlike proportions into an adult frame capable of reproduction and sustained physical effort. Testosterone and estrogen rise, supporting increases in muscle mass and reinforcing skeletal structure. This hormonal environment aligns closely with the years when reproductive success historically carried the greatest evolutionary significance. The timing is not accidental. The body's internal chemistry was shaped to amplify strength precisely when it mattered most for survival, mating, and child-rearing. During early adulthood, anabolic signaling remains robust. Growth factors stimulate tissue repair after strain, and hormonal support helps maintain lean mass even under demanding physical conditions. In ancestral contexts, these years coincided with intense activity, hunting, gathering, migration, and defense. The endocrine system responded dynamically to workload and nutritional intake, reinforcing muscle where needed. Yet this hormonal intensity is not indefinite. As reproductive years progress and eventually wane, the endocrine profile gradually recalibrates. Testosterone in males and estrogen in females do not disappear abruptly. They decline slowly across decades. Growth hormone and insulin-like growth factor also diminish with age. This gradual shift influences muscle protein synthesis, bone remodeling, and overall recovery capacity. The body continues to function and adapt, yet the biochemical signals that once strongly promoted expansion become more measured. This recalibration reflects ancient demographic patterns in which peak reproductive years represented the central axis of evolutionary investment. Bone density illustrates this hormonal interplay clearly. Estrogen plays a critical role in maintaining bone mass in both sexes, and its reduction after menopause is associated with accelerated bone resorption. Testosterone contributes to muscle maintenance and influences bone indirectly through mechanical load. As these hormones decline, the balance between formation and breakdown changes. The skeleton remains structurally capable, yet its capacity for rapid reinforcement lessens. Archaeological findings from older individuals in prehistoric populations often reveal thinning cortical bone and degenerative joint changes consistent with this pattern. The endocrine system also interacts with environmental signals. Physical activity stimulates hormonal pathways that promote muscle maintenance, while inactivity reduces stimulation. Nutrition, stress, and sleep influence endocrine balance as well. In ancestral settings, these inputs fluctuated naturally. Hormonal rhythms were therefore intertwined with ecological variability. The body amplified strength when reproductive urgency and environmental challenge converged, then gradually redirected energy as those forces receded. Importantly, hormonal decline does not imply abrupt weakness. It signifies a transition in biological emphasis. After reproductive years, the evolutionary imperative to sustain maximal anabolic signaling decreases. Communities historically relied not only on physical strength but also on knowledge, social cohesion, and intergenerational cooperation. Hormonal recalibration supported a shift from expansion toward conservation. When viewed through the lens of evolutionary history, the gradual decline in hormone-driven strength appears consistent with demographic realities. The body's internal chemistry was sculpted to ensure sufficient power during key life stages rather than to maintain unchanging vigor across extended modern lifespans. The endocrine system orchestrates growth, peaks, and gentle descent in alignment with ancestral reproductive patterns. Strength rises under hormonal encouragement, then slowly adjusts as the biological narrative moves beyond its most urgent chapter. Hormonal rhythms do not function in isolation. They move in coordination with daily cycles, seasonal cues, and life stages. From early adulthood onward, subtle changes begin to reshape this coordination. The amplitude of certain hormonal peaks decreases, and the timing of release may become less tightly synchronized. Cortisol, growth hormone, testosterone, and estrogen interact in complex feedback loops, each influencing tissue repair and muscle maintenance. In youth, these loops operate with pronounced oscillations that favor building and rapid recovery. Over time, the oscillations soften. The overall pattern shifts toward conservation rather than expansion. Circadian rhythms offer one example of this interplay. Hormone release follows a 2-4-hour cycle, influenced by light exposure and sleep patterns. Growth hormone secretion is closely tied to deep sleep, which tends to decline in duration and quality with age. As sleep architecture changes, anabolic signaling may also adjust. The body still repairs during rest, but the magnitude of nightly rebuilding may diminish gradually. In ancestral contexts, exposure to natural light and dark cycles structured hormonal rhythms consistently. Modern artificial lighting and irregular schedules introduce new variables, yet the underlying endocrine architecture remains rooted in ancient timing mechanisms. Reproductive transitions further illustrate hormonal recalibration. In females, menopause marks a significant decline in estrogen production. This shift influences not only reproductive capacity but also bone density, muscle distribution, and connective tissue elasticity. In males, testosterone declines more gradually, yet its cumulative effect on muscle protein synthesis and recovery becomes evident across decades. These transitions reflect life history stages rather than sudden pathology. They signal the closing of the primary reproductive window, a phase that once held the strongest evolutionary pressure. Hormones also mediate the body's response to stress. Acute stress elevates cortisol, mobilizing energy reserves to meet immediate demands. Chronic stress, however, can alter the balance between anabolic and catabolic processes. Sustained elevations in cortisol may favor the breakdown of muscle tissue to maintain glucose availability. In prehistoric settings, stresses were often episodic and directly tied to environmental threats. The endocrine response rose and fell accordingly. In more complex modern societies, stress can become persistent, subtly reshaping hormonal equilibrium over years. The system continues to operate as designed, yet the signals it interprets have changed. Metabolic hormones such as insulin further connect endocrine shifts to strength. Insulin sensitivity tends to decline with age in many individuals, influencing how effectively nutrients are directed toward muscle repair. Even modest reductions in insulin sensitivity can alter the efficiency of protein synthesis after meals. In youth, nutrient intake often translates more directly into muscle maintenance. Later in life, the same intake may produce a smaller anabolic response. These changes are gradual and multifactorial, shaped by genetics, activity, and diet, yet they reflect the broader theme of recalibration rather than abrupt failure. Across the lifespan, the endocrine system orchestrates growth, reproduction, stress adaptation, and maintenance. Its shifting patterns mirror demographic realities embedded in human evolution. Hormonal peaks coincide with reproductive urgency, and their gradual softening corresponds with the diminishing selective pressure beyond that phase. Strength, guided by these chemical signals, rises during years of greatest biological emphasis, and then adjusts as priorities change. The body continues to sustain itself, yet the hormonal symphony that once amplified expansion transitions toward a quieter, steadier rhythm aligned with conservation. Hormonal recalibration does not signal collapse, it marks transition. Across decades, the endocrine system gradually redirects resources away from expansion and towards stability. Signals that once amplified muscle growth soften, not because the body has failed, but because its internal priorities have shifted. During adolescence and early adulthood, endocrine patterns favor building. Testosterone and estrogen support protein synthesis and bone reinforcement. Growth hormone pulses during deep sleep stimulate tissue repair. Insulin-like growth factors enhance cellular proliferation. These chemical signals align closely with the years when reproduction, competition, and physical contribution historically shaped evolutionary outcomes. As life advances beyond this phase, hormonal intensity diminishes in subtle increments. Testosterone declines gradually in males, influencing muscle mass, red blood cell production, and overall anabolic tone. In females, the transition through menopause brings a marked reduction in estrogen, affecting bone density and connective tissue resilience. Growth hormone secretion decreases steadily in both sexes. The body does not cease functioning, it recalibrates. Protein synthesis remains possible, yet its baseline is lower. Recovery after strain continues, yet the tempo shifts. This gradual adjustment reflects demographic realities in which the selective pressure to maintain maximal anabolic signaling was strongest before and during peak reproductive years. The interplay between hormones and tissue repair becomes increasingly nuanced over time. Muscle cells respond to anabolic signals, but they also depend on the surrounding hormonal environment to interpret those signals effectively. When growth hormone pulses diminish and sex hormone levels fall, the same mechanical stimulus may yield a smaller adaptive response. Resistance training can still increase muscle mass in older adults, demonstrating that the system retains plasticity. Yet the threshold for adaptation may be higher, and the magnitude of change smaller. This pattern underscores that hormonal recalibration does not eliminate strength, it moderates its expansion. Stress hormones add another layer to this dynamic. Cortisol, released in response to physical or psychological stress, mobilizes energy reserves. In acute situations, this response supports survival by increasing glucose availability. However, sustained elevation of cortisol can influence muscle protein breakdown. In ancestral settings, stresses were often immediate and episodic predator encounters, conflict, climatic extremes. The endocrine response rose sharply and then receded. In modern contexts, stress may become chronic and diffuse. The hormonal architecture remains tuned for acute challenge, yet it may be activated more persistently. Over years, this persistent signaling can subtly influence muscle maintenance and repair. Metabolic hormones further connect aging with strength. Insulin facilitates nutrient uptake into muscle cells, supporting glycogen storage and protein synthesis. With age, insulin sensitivity may decline, influenced by genetics, activity levels, and diet. Reduced sensitivity alters how efficiently nutrients contribute to rebuilding after strain. Even modest changes can affect long-term maintenance of lean mass. In prehistoric environments characterized by variable food availability and high activity, insulin dynamics were likely tightly coupled to energy demand. Modern abundance and altered activity patterns shift this coupling, yet the underlying endocrine responses remain governed by ancient regulatory pathways. Sleep also interacts with hormonal recalibration. Deep sleep stages are associated with growth hormone release and tissue repair. Aging often brings changes in sleep architecture, including reduced duration of slow-wave sleep. As nightly growth hormone pulses diminish, cumulative repair capacity may adjust accordingly. This shift is gradual and multifactorial, influenced by circadian rhythm, stress, and environmental cues. In ancestral contexts, sleep patterns aligned closely with natural light cycles. Modern artificial lighting and irregular schedules introduce variability, yet the endocrine system continues to rely on circadian timing mechanisms that evolved under different conditions. Importantly, hormonal decline is not uniform across individuals. Genetics, lifestyle, nutrition, and activity levels shape endocrine trajectories. Some individuals maintain relatively stable anabolic profiles into later decades, while others experience more pronounced shifts. Nevertheless, the general trend across populations reveals a gradual softening of anabolic intensity. This softening aligns with the diminishing evolutionary emphasis on reproduction and peak physical competition in later life. The body's design prioritizes adequacy and adaptability rather than perpetual expansion. Archaeological evidence indirectly reflects these patterns. Skeletal remains from older individuals in prehistoric populations often show signs of reduced bone density and joint remodeling consistent with hormonal shifts. Yet the presence of elderly individuals in burial sites indicates that communities supported them. Their survival suggests that maximal strength was not required for continued participation in group life. Social roles evolved alongside biological transitions, reducing the evolutionary necessity of sustaining peak hormonal stimulation indefinitely. Across millennia, the endocrine system has functioned as a mediator between environment, reproduction, and maintenance. Its gradual recalibration after reproductive years mirrors the demographic and ecological patterns of human evolution. Strength rises under hormonal encouragement, when it most influences survival and gene transmission. Later, as reproductive urgency fades, hormonal signals adjust, guiding the body toward conservation and steady function. The inability to remain indefinitely strong emerges not from a single defect, but from this coordinated shift in internal chemistry. Hormones, acting quietly over decades, reshape tissue dynamics in accordance with priorities embedded in our species' deep history. To understand why the human body cannot remain strong forever, it is necessary to step back and examine the broader structure of early human populations. Strength exists not only within individuals but within generations. In prehistoric communities, age distribution was uneven. Many individuals did not survive infancy or childhood. Those who reached adolescence entered a narrower cohort shaped by survival pressures. By the time individuals reached what we would now call middle age, they represented a smaller fraction of the original birth group. The demographic landscape into which the human body evolved was therefore very different from the age structures common today. Archaeological studies of burial sites across Africa, Europe, and Asia consistently show that while some individuals lived into their 40s and 50s, the proportion reaching advanced old age was limited. Life expectancy at birth was low, largely due to high early mortality. Yet conditional life expectancy, meaning lifespan after surviving childhood, could extend into adulthood and beyond. Even so, the demographic pyramid remained weighted toward younger ages. This structure influenced evolutionary priorities. When relatively few individuals lived deep into old age, the selective pressure to maintain peak physical strength across many decades was modest. Within such populations, generational overlap existed, but it was not as extended as in modern societies. A typical community might include children, reproductive adults, and a smaller number of elders. The reproductive and provisioning responsibilities rested heavily on young and middle-aged adults. These were the years when physical strength had the greatest impact on food acquisition, defense, and offspring survival. Evolution therefore concentrated its refinements on these stages. Systems supporting muscle growth, bone reinforcement, and rapid repair were optimized to function effectively during this central demographic window. The presence of elders, though less common in proportion, played a significant social role. Evidence from healed injuries and long-term degenerative conditions suggests that communities supported older individuals even when physical capacity had declined. The survival of such individuals indicates cooperation and social cohesion. However, their continued participation did not require maximal strength. Knowledge of territory, memory of seasonal patterns, and skill in tool-making could be transmitted without peak muscular power. This social buffering reduced the evolutionary demand to preserve youthful strength indefinitely. Demographic modeling in evolutionary biology highlights how traits that influence early life survival and reproduction are strongly selected, while those affecting late life function experience weaker pressure. If only a subset of individuals regularly lived beyond the reproductive phase, then traits governing very late life strength would contribute less to overall gene transmission. Over many generations, this pattern shapes the architecture of the lifespan. The body becomes finely tuned for peak function during the years most critical for demographic continuity, and less intensely refined beyond them. Environmental hazards further shape these demographic realities. Infection, injury, childbirth complications, and climatic extremes limited the number of individuals reaching advanced age. Even in cooperative societies, medical knowledge and technology were constrained. Under such conditions, the evolutionary advantage of investing heavily in systems that maintained maximal strength at 70 or 80 years old would have been limited compared to investing in systems that ensured robust performance at 25 or 30. Seen within this generational framework, the gradual loss of strength aligns with demographic probabilities embedded in our species' origins. The human body was sculpted within populations where the median age was far younger than in many modern societies. Strength was crucial, but it was crucial within a narrower age band. As individuals moved beyond that band, biological investment shifted toward maintenance sufficient for participation rather than expansion toward peak performance. This population perspective reframes the question of decline. The body did not evolve under conditions where lifelong peak strength was statistically common or necessary. It evolved within age structures that emphasized early and midlife resilience. The demographic architecture of our ancestors remains imprinted in the trajectory of our physiology, guiding the rise and gradual recalibration of strength across the human lifespan. When examining early human populations more closely, the shape of generational overlap reveals an important pattern. In many prehistoric communities, 3 generations might coexist at the same time. children, reproductive adults, and a smaller number of elders. However, the duration of overlap between grandparents and grandchildren was often shorter than what is common today. Climatic instability, infectious disease, and physical hazards limited the number of individuals who reached advanced age. As a result, evolutionary pressure focused most intensely on the health and strength of those in their reproductive and provisioning years. Demographic reconstructions based on skeletal assemblages suggest that while some individuals lived into their 60s, the proportion was modest. The majority of energy investment, both biologically and socially, centered on sustaining young adults capable of acquiring food and protecting offspring. In such contexts, peak muscular strength and physical resilience were most critical during a limited span. After this span, even if individuals survived for years or decades, their contribution increasingly relied on experience rather than force. Natural selection therefore concentrated refinement on traits that enhance survival to and through reproductive maturity. This demographic concentration shaped how biological systems were calibrated. Bone density, muscle mass, and hormonal output reached their highest levels during early adulthood. These peaks corresponded to the period when individuals bore children, defended territory, and ensured group continuity. Beyond that period, evolutionary returns diminished. The presence of elders still offered value through social memory and childcare, but the survival of the group did not depend on maintaining maximal strength in every aging individual. Anthropological evidence from contemporary foraging societies, which provide partial analogues to ancestral lifeways, shows similar trends. Physical capacity remains high into middle adulthood, yet gradual decline begins thereafter. Older individuals often shift toward roles emphasizing knowledge transmission, tool craftsmanship, and social mediation. These patterns suggest continuity with ancient demographic realities. Strength was essential, but it was not the sole measure of contribution within a community. The evolutionary implications of this structure are subtle yet powerful. Traits that enhance early life survival and reproductive success accumulate across generations because they directly influence gene transmission. Traits that primarily affect individuals after reproductive age are filtered less rigorously. This does not mean that late life function is irrelevant, but it means that natural selection exerts weaker pressure to optimize it perfectly. Over millennia, this gradient shapes the lifespan. The body becomes highly refined for peak performance in youth and early adulthood, while maintenance in later decades reflects adequacy rather than maximal optimization. Environmental unpredictability reinforced this pattern. High mortality from infection or injury meant that not all individuals reached advanced age. In populations where life beyond 50 or 60 was less common, the selective benefit of sustaining peak muscular strength into very late life would have been limited. Investing heavily in systems that prolonged maximum strength indefinitely would have yielded diminishing evolutionary returns compared to investing in robust early development and reproduction. Within this demographic framework, the gradual decline of strength appears consistent with ancestral probabilities. The body evolved within populations where youthful vigor was statistically central and extended old age was less frequent. As generations overlapped only briefly at their extremes, biological priorities aligned with the most impactful years. Strength rose to meet those demands and gradually recalibrated as demographic necessity shifted. The imprint of this age-structured history remains visible in the trajectory of human physiology today. When we extend the demographic lens across longer stretches of prehistory, another pattern becomes visible. Human populations did not expand steadily in size for most of their existence. They fluctuated. Periods of growth were interrupted by bottlenecks caused by climate shifts, disease, migration stress, or resource scarcity. In small populations, the genetic contribution of individuals who reproduced successfully during peak years carried disproportionate weight. Late-life traits, particularly those expressed well after reproduction, influenced gene pools less consistently. This uneven demographic rhythm reinforced the concentration of evolutionary refinement on early and mid-adult strength rather than on its indefinite preservation. The archaeological record shows evidence of population contractions during severe climatic phases, such as glacial periods or prolonged droughts. During these intervals, survival hinged on immediate resilience and reproductive continuity. Individuals who could endure environmental stress long enough to reproduce transmitted their genetic variants forward. Those who lived long beyond reproductive years contributed socially, yet their late-life physical characteristics exerted weaker evolutionary impact. Over generations, this demographic filtering shaped biological systems to prioritize timely strength over lifelong maximal performance. Genetic models in evolutionary biology illustrate how traits expressed primarily after reproduction can persist, even if they reduce physical performance later in life. This dynamic occurs because selection acts most strongly on traits that influence reproductive success. Variants that enhance early life muscle development or reproductive capability may be retained even if they subtly increase late life decline. This principle, sometimes referred to as antagonistic pleiotropy, suggests that biological trade-offs are embedded within the genome. A gene that promotes strong anabolic signaling in youth may also accelerate tissue wear later. Natural selection tolerates such trade-offs when early advantages outweigh later costs in terms of gene transmission. Population structure further reinforces this logic. In many prehistoric communities, elders existed but in smaller proportion. Their survival often depended on group support rather than on personal physical dominance. Knowledge transmission, childcare assistance, and social cohesion provided value beyond muscle strength. The evolutionary benefit of sustaining cognitive clarity and social stability may have outweighed the benefit of maintaining peak muscular power. As a result, selective pressure to refine late-life strength was relatively limited compared to the pressure shaping early-life vigor. Environmental instability compounded these demographic realities. Migration events required rapid adaptation, often favoring young adults capable of enduring long journeys and establishing new settlements. In such scenarios, peak physical capacity during reproductive years directly influenced survival of the migrating group. Once settlement was secured and offspring matured, the relative importance of maximal strength declined. Over repeated cycles of migration and adaptation, biological investment continued to emphasize timely strength rather than perpetual maintenance. This long-term demographic pattern helps clarify why strength follows a predictable arc across the human lifespan. It rises efficiently toward reproductive maturity, remains robust during central adult years, and gradually recalibrates thereafter. The architecture of this arc mirrors population probabilities embedded in our species' history. It does not suggest neglect or defect. It reflects strategic allocation shaped by fluctuating numbers and survival demands. When considered within the sweep of millennia, the inability to remain strong forever appears aligned with generational realities. Human bodies evolved in populations where youth and early adulthood carried the greatest evolutionary consequence. Extended late-life strength was neither common nor strictly necessary for gene transmission. The demographic imprint of those ancient age structures continues to guide physiological trajectories today, shaping the rhythm by which strength rises, serves, and slowly adjusts within the boundaries of our evolutionary past. In the modern world, many individuals live far beyond the ages that were statistically common throughout most of human history. Advances in sanitation, medicine, and food production have extended average lifespan dramatically in certain regions. Yet the architecture of the human body remains largely unchanged at a biological level. The systems that govern muscle growth, bone remodeling, and tissue repair were calibrated within ancestral demographic frameworks. When lifespan extends beyond those original parameters, a subtle mismatch appears. Strength, once aligned with reproductive urgency and midlife demands, now exists within decades of additional longevity that evolution did not intensively refine. This extension of lifespan does not imply that the body is failing prematurely. Rather, it reveals that biological design reflects older probabilities. When humans routinely lived into their 60s or 70s in prehistoric contexts, they were exceptions rather than the norm. Today, in many societies, living into the 8th or 9th decade is increasingly common. The endocrine shifts, cumulative microdamage, and energy allocation patterns that once unfolded near the end of life now unfold across a longer, visible span. The gradual recalibration of strength that historically occurred in the later portion of the lifespan is now experienced over more years. Archaeological evidence shows that some individuals in prehistoric populations survived into advanced age, but their physical condition often reflected accumulated wear. Degenerative joint changes, vertebral compression, and dental attrition are frequent findings. These individuals likely relied on community support and adapted their roles within the group. Their existence demonstrates that aging is not purely a modern phenomenon. However, the proportion of such elders was smaller. In contemporary populations, a much larger fraction of individuals live long enough to experience decades of gradual physiological adjustment. Modern expectations often equate longevity with sustained vigor. Yet evolutionary history did not bind these two variables tightly together. Extending lifespan through medical intervention does not automatically extend the hormonal peaks, regenerative precision, or energetic allocations characteristic of early adulthood. The body continues to follow its internal timetable, shaped by millions of years of selection focused on earlier stages of life. Muscle protein synthesis becomes less efficient. Bone turnover patterns shift, and connective tissues accumulate modifications even as life expectancy rises. This divergence between lifespan and peak strength is not a sign of biological inadequacy. It is a reflection of historical context. Evolution operates slowly, sculpting traits over countless generations. The rapid extension of human lifespan over recent centuries has outpaced the time required for substantial genetic recalibration. As a result, physiological processes that once concluded near the end of life now unfold within extended years of relative safety and medical support. Strength gradually adjusts within this expanded timeline. Importantly, modern lifestyle factors interact with this extended lifespan. Reduced daily physical demands, altered diets, and chronic stress can influence muscle maintenance and hormonal balance. Yet even in physically active older individuals, age-related shifts still occur. The arc of strength remains visible, though its slope may vary. This persistence underscores that the underlying design of the body was not optimized for unchanging peak performance across 9 decades. It was optimized for sufficiency during the years that most directly influence reproductive success and group survival. In this extended modern lifespan, the gradual loss of strength becomes more noticeable precisely because more individuals reach ages where it unfolds. The biological narrative has not fundamentally changed. The demographic context has. Longevity has expanded, while the foundational architecture of muscle maintenance and repair remains anchored in ancestral probabilities. The body continues to operate within parameters shaped long before contemporary expectations of lifelong strength emerged. When lifespan extends but biological calibration remains largely rooted in ancestral patterns, a quiet tension emerges. The years beyond reproductive maturity are no longer brief or statistically uncommon. They can span decades. During this extended phase, the processes of hormonal recalibration, cumulative microdamage, and gradual reduction in regenerative precision continue at their evolutionary pace. The difference is that these processes now unfold within a longer and more visible stretch of life. What once occurred near the demographic edge of existence now occupies a central portion of modern adulthood. In earlier human populations, an individual who lived into the later decades may have already experienced substantial physiological change, yet the proportion of such individuals was smaller. In contemporary societies, medical advances reduce mortality from infection, trauma, and childbirth complications. Sanitation and nutrition improve early survival. As a result, more individuals enter the age ranges where muscle protein synthesis slows, bone density shifts, and connective tissue elasticity gradually decreases. The biological arc remains similar, but the number of people traversing its later segments has increased dramatically. This expanded visibility can create the impression that decline has accelerated. In reality, the rate of many age-related physiological processes has not fundamentally changed. Muscle mass typically peaks in early adulthood and declines gradually thereafter, a pattern observed across populations and cultures. What has changed is the baseline expectation. When survival into advanced age becomes common, society may anticipate sustained youthful strength alongside extended lifespan. Yet the evolutionary forces that shaped muscle maintenance did not operate under such demographic assumptions. Modern healthcare further modifies this landscape. Interventions such as joint replacement, fracture repair, and pharmacological management of chronic conditions allow individuals to maintain mobility and independence longer than in prehistoric contexts. These interventions extend functional years but do not fundamentally alter the endocrine and cellular processes governing muscle maintenance. The body continues to operate according to regulatory pathways shaped in earlier eras. The result is a lifespan that stretches beyond the evolutionary peak of physical robustness. Lifestyle choices can modulate, but not eliminate, this trajectory. Regular resistance training stimulates muscle protein synthesis even in later decades. Adequate protein intake supports repair. Sleep hygiene influences hormonal rhythms. These factors demonstrate that plasticity persists throughout life. However, the magnitude of adaptation may differ from that of youth. The ceiling of potential change narrows slightly as regenerative efficiency shifts. Strength can be preserved and improved within limits, yet the biological framework still reflects ancestral priorities. Cross-cultural comparisons illustrate this interplay. In populations where older adults remain physically active through manual labor or subsistence tasks, muscle mass and functional strength often remain higher than in sedentary urban populations of similar age. Nevertheless, even in these active communities, the gradual arc of recalibration is visible. The slope may be gentler, but the direction remains consistent. The body retains its evolutionary rhythm despite modern variation in lifestyle. Understanding this extended phase clarifies that longevity and peak strength are related but not identical. Lifespan can increase through environmental and medical changes more rapidly than evolutionary refinements can reshape internal regulatory systems. The architecture of muscle maintenance remains oriented toward early and midlife demands. As decades accumulate beyond those demands, gradual shifts become more apparent. The body continues to adapt and function, yet its design reflects probabilities embedded in a world where extended old age was less common. Within this expanded horizon of life, the recalibration of strength becomes part of a broader narrative of adaptation rather than failure. The organism was not engineered to sustain the exact physiology of youth indefinitely. It was shaped to ensure continuity during the years most critical for reproduction and survival. As modern longevity stretches the timeline, the ancient rhythm of growth, peak, and gradual adjustment remains intact, revealing the enduring imprint of evolutionary history on contemporary bodies. When longevity extends beyond the evolutionary window in which peak strength once held central importance, another shift becomes visible. The later decades of life are no longer statistical outliers but common phases of experience. Within these decades, the body continues to follow biological programs that evolved under different demographic pressures. Hormonal recalibration progresses, repair systems operate with measured efficiency, and cumulative microdamage subtly reshapes tissues. The result is not sudden weakness, but a steady narrowing of maximal capacity relative to youth. In ancestral contexts, many individuals did not routinely inhabit these extended years. Those who did often lived within cooperative networks that redistributed physical labor. The community structure allowed older individuals to contribute through experience and social coordination rather than through sustained physical dominance. In modern societies, similar redistribution occurs in different forms. Technological tools reduce the necessity for raw strength in daily survival tasks. Cognitive and social roles expand as physical demands contract. This social buffering further reduces the evolutionary pressure to preserve peak muscular performance across the entire lifespan. Medical and nutritional advances can mitigate certain aspects of decline. Adequate protein intake supports muscle maintenance. Physical training stimulates anabolic pathways even in later decades. Bone density can be influenced by weight-bearing exercise and pharmacological interventions. These factors demonstrate that plasticity persists, yet plasticity operates within structural boundaries. Muscle satellite cell numbers decline gradually. Hormonal peaks soften. Connective tissues accumulate biochemical modifications. Even with optimal intervention, the ceiling of strength typically adjusts downward compared to early adulthood. Population studies consistently show that muscle mass and strength peak in early adulthood and decline progressively thereafter, though rates vary widely among individuals. This pattern appears across diverse cultures and levels of technological development. Such consistency suggests that the trajectory reflects deeply rooted biological programming rather than solely modern lifestyle. When lifespan extends to 8 or 9 decades, the years of recalibration simply become more numerous. The arc stretches, but its direction remains familiar. The extended modern lifespan thus reveals a distinction between survival and maximal performance. Evolution ensured that humans could live long enough to reproduce and assist in raising offspring. It did not ensure that strength would remain at its youthful summit across prolonged decades of post-reproductive life. The body remains resilient and adaptable, yet its priorities shift. Maintenance replaces expansion. Efficiency replaces amplification. This perspective reframes the visible decline in strength during later life. Rather than representing a malfunction unique to modernity, it reflects the unfolding of ancient biological rhythms across a newly lengthened timeline. The additional decades afforded by medical progress allow more individuals to experience phases of life that were once less common. Within these phases, the body continues to operate according to evolutionary logic shaped in earlier demographic landscapes. Seen in this light, the inability to remain strong forever is inseparable from the remarkable success of human longevity. As life extends, the inherited design of muscle maintenance and repair becomes more apparent. The body was sculpted to ensure continuity, not perpetual peak output. In a world where lifespan now exceeds ancestral averages, strength follows its ancestral arc, rising with reproductive urgency and gradually recalibrating as years accumulate beyond that evolutionary horizon. The experience of losing strength is not only physical, it is also perceptual. The human brain constructs a sense of continuity across time. It compares present capacity with remembered ability and measures difference as change. In youth and early adulthood, physical performance often improves with practice and maturation. The memory of this upward trajectory becomes part of personal identity. When strength gradually recalibrates later in life, the contrast between memory and present sensation becomes noticeable. This contrast can shape how decline is interpreted, even though the biological processes behind it follow predictable evolutionary patterns. From an evolutionary standpoint, the brain evolved to monitor bodily condition closely. Perception of fatigue, pain, and reduced capacity serves protective functions. These sensations encourage conservation when resources are low or when tissues require recovery. In ancestral environments, such signals likely prevented overexertion during scarcity or after injury. The gradual reduction in maximal strength may therefore be accompanied by heightened awareness of effort. Tasks once performed effortlessly may require more concentration. The subjective experience amplifies what is biologically a steady recalibration. Neurobiology contributes to this perception. Motor neurons and muscle fibers communicate through neuromuscular junctions. Over decades, subtle changes occur in these connections. Some motor units may be lost, while others expand to compensate. The reorganization preserves function but may alter fine coordination or maximal output. These shifts are gradual and often imperceptible at first. However, when combined with hormonal and muscular recalibration, they influence how strength feels from within. The sensation of effort increases even when objective capacity remains within functional range. Cultural expectations also shape perception. In societies that value youth and peak performance, strength is often equated with vitality. When individuals compare themselves to earlier versions of their bodies or to younger cohorts, natural recalibration may be interpreted as deficiency rather than transition. Yet, across history, the meaning of strength has shifted with social roles. In early human communities, older individuals were not necessarily expected to perform the same physical tasks as young adults. Their value extended beyond muscular power. The psychological framing of decline was likely different within those demographic and social contexts. Cognitive aging interacts with this dynamic as well. Processing speed and reaction time may gradually change, influencing coordination and perceived agility. The brain integrates sensory input and motor output continuously. Small delays in processing can alter the subjective experience of strength. These changes are part of a broader physiological arc rather than isolated failures. They reflect the same life history trade-offs that shaped muscular and hormonal patterns. Importantly, perception does not always align precisely with objective measurement. Studies of physical performance in older adults often show variability that exceeds subjective estimates. Some individuals underestimate their capacity due to heightened caution or altered confidence. Others maintain substantial functional strength through consistent activity. The interplay between brain interpretation and bodily condition becomes a central feature of aging. When viewed through the lens of evolutionary history, the psychological dimension of declining strength appears as an extension of adaptive monitoring systems. The brain evolved to detect shifts in energy, injury risk, and capacity. As biological recalibration unfolds across extended modern lifespans, awareness of change becomes more prolonged. The experience of decline is therefore not only a physical trajectory, but a cognitive narrative shaped by memory, expectation, and ancestral survival logic. Strength adjusts gradually, and the mind interprets this adjustment within the story of a life that now spans more decades than those in which the human body was originally refined. Memory shapes the way change is experienced. The human brain does not evaluate strength in isolation. It evaluates it against stored impressions of earlier capability. Motor patterns learned in youth are encoded deeply within neural circuits. When a movement that once required little effort begins to demand more concentration, the contrast becomes perceptible. This comparison is not a flaw of cognition. It reflects the brain's role in maintaining internal models of the body's potential. In ancestral environments, accurately gauging one's physical capacity could determine survival. Overestimating strength during a hunt or confrontation carried risk. Underestimating it could mean missed opportunity. The brain therefore evolved to track deviations carefully. As decades pass, subtle neural changes influence this tracking. Motor cortex organization may shift as certain muscle fibers decline and others compensate. Reaction time can lengthen modestly. Proprioception, the sense of body position, may become less precise. None of these shifts necessarily eliminate functional strength, yet they can alter the felt quality of movement. A lift that once felt automatic may now feel deliberate. This deliberateness contributes to the perception that strength has diminished, even if the measurable difference is gradual. Emotion also interacts with this process. The limbic system integrates memory with feeling. Experiences of fatigue or difficulty can trigger reflection on earlier stages of life when tasks were easier. In cultures that equate youth with capability, such reflections may intensify awareness of change. Yet across human history, the meaning of effort varied. In small foraging communities, roles adjusted naturally with age. Physical tasks redistributed within the group. An elder's reduced lifting capacity did not necessarily equate to reduced value. Social structures buffered perception by aligning expectations with life stage. Modern environments often preserve the same physical standards across extended lifespans. Workplaces, media, and social narratives may implicitly compare individuals to youthful benchmarks. This comparison amplifies the cognitive dissonance between memory and present capacity. The body follows its evolutionary arc, but cultural framing can interpret this arc as deviation rather than transition. The psychological dimension of strength is therefore shaped not only by biology, but also by expectation. Neurochemical changes contribute to these perceptions as well. Dopamine pathways, which influence motivation and reward, shift gradually with age. Tasks that once provided strong intrinsic reinforcement through physical mastery may feel less immediately rewarding. This change can influence activity levels, indirectly affecting muscle maintenance. The interplay between neurochemistry and behavior creates feedback loops. Reduced perceived reward may lead to decreased activity, which in turn influences strength. The cycle reflects complex integration between brain and body. Importantly, awareness of change can also foster adaptation. The brain retains plasticity throughout life. Learning new movement strategies, refining technique, and adjusting training intensity can support continued strength within realistic limits. The cognitive system that monitors decline can also guide recalibration. In ancestral settings, such adaptability allowed individuals to modify roles and strategies as conditions evolved. The same adaptive capacity persists today. When considered within the broader evolutionary narrative, the psychological experience of declining strength appears as part of a monitoring system designed for survival. The brain compares past and present to assess risk and opportunity. As lifespan extends, this monitoring extends as well. The perception of change becomes a longer chapter in the story of the body. Strength shifts gradually, and the mind records those shifts within memory and meaning. The experience of decline is therefore both biological and interpretive. reflecting ancient survival mechanisms unfolding within modern longevity. Over time, the perception of strength becomes inseparable from the story we tell about ourselves. The human mind weaves bodily experience into identity. In youth, increasing capability often coincides with expanding independence. Running faster, lifting heavier, enduring longer, these sensations reinforce a narrative of growth. When this upward trajectory gradually levels and then begins to shift downward, the narrative must adjust. The biological recalibration that unfolds within muscle fibers, hormones, and connective tissue becomes interpreted through memory and meaning. From an evolutionary perspective, this interpretive layer served a purpose. Awareness of declining physical capacity could guide behavior. An individual who recognized slower recovery or reduced endurance might choose safer strategies during hunts or conflicts. This self-monitoring enhanced survival by encouraging caution where necessary. The brain did not evolve to deny change, it evolved to detect it. The subtle discomfort associated with diminished strength may therefore function as a regulatory signal rather than a purely negative experience. Neural plasticity remains active across the lifespan, even as certain physical capacities shift. Older adults often refine efficiency in movement, drawing upon accumulated motor experience. They may recruit muscle groups more strategically or adjust pacing to conserve energy. Such adaptations reflect the brain's capacity to compensate for gradual biological recalibration. In ancestral communities, this adaptive refinement allowed continued participation in daily life. Physical roles shifted gradually rather than abruptly, and knowledge-based contributions gained prominence as brute strength softened. Cultural narratives influence how this shift is experienced. In societies that equate strength exclusively with youth, the transition may feel like loss. Yet in many traditional cultures, aging carried status and authority. Elders guided decision-making, mediated conflict, and preserved collective memory. Physical capacity was valued, but it was not the sole determinant of worth. When expectations align with life-stage realities, the psychological burden of recalibration diminishes. The body's arc becomes understood as a sequence rather than a decline. Modern environments sometimes extend physical expectations beyond ancestral norms. Workplaces and recreational pursuits may implicitly compare individuals across wide age spans. Media portrayals often emphasize sustained youthful appearance and performance. These cultural signals can intensify awareness of biological shifts that would otherwise feel gradual and unremarkable. The evolutionary architecture of strength has not changed, yet the interpretive context has. The mind continues to monitor capacity according to ancient survival logic, but it now does so within expanded lifespans and altered social expectations. Importantly, perception can influence physiology through behavior. Individuals who view recalibration as inevitable decline may reduce activity, accelerating muscle loss through disuse. Those who view it as transition may adapt training patterns and maintain higher functional capacity. The brain's interpretation interacts with hormonal and muscular systems, forming feedback loops that shape lived experience. This interaction does not override evolutionary design, but it can modulate how that design expresses itself across decades. When we consider the psychological dimension alongside hormonal shifts, demographic structure, and energy allocation, a coherent pattern emerges. Strength rises in alignment with reproductive urgency and environmental demand. It gradually adjusts as those forces change. The mind, evolved to track bodily status, perceives this adjustment and integrates it into identity. The resulting experience is neither purely biological nor purely cultural. It is the meeting point of evolutionary history and individual narrative. Seen within this broader context, the inability to remain strong forever appears less like betrayal and more like transition. The body was sculpted to perform intensely during phases of greatest evolutionary consequence. It was not sculpted to sustain that intensity unchanged across extended modern lifespans. The mind senses this recalibration and responds with memory, comparison, and meaning. Together, body and brain trace an arc shaped by ancient priorities, now unfolding within the expanded horizon of contemporary life.